Chapter 15 covers media planning. It's really an introduction, but it gives you a pretty good introduction. Media planners are basically in business to connect messages to clients or to potential customers of the client, rather. As it says here in the middle bullet, their work connects brands with customers and other stakeholders. Media decisions are important for a number of reasons, and media buys are heavily researched by primarily a research staff in larger agencies, a media research staff. In smaller agencies, there might be a limited number of media people, so they may do research and buying. Anyway, the media decisions are really, it's where the rubber meets the road in the advertising business. Media costs are usually, for each client, the biggest element in their marketing communications budget. And if media isn't right, then all the work that was done up front in the planning and the targeting and the segmenting and the great creative is not used to its fullest potential, because all your good work is not seen by the maximum number of people. So that's why media is so key. It's where the biggest budget is and where the work really pays off if it's done right. So media is critical. Media engagement research basically uses a wide variety of sources. Some of the key ones here are client information, market research, competitive advertising, and a variety of other sources you see here. Looking at newspapers, what's most important? Generally, for media considerations for newspapers, it's circulation. Same for magazine. Magazine rates, like newspaper rates, are based on guaranteed circulation that a publisher promises to provide. Now, there's also a measure in publication advertising called readership. Magazines will publish their readership, and it's always higher than circulation. Why is readership higher than circulation? Well, think about that for just a second. The magazines have pass-around rates. In other words, a magazine goes to a home or to a dental office or a place of business, and usually it gets passed to 3 or 4 or 5 people before it's done. So a circulation might have, or a publication might have circulation to a couple 100,000 people, yet claim that their readership is higher. However, all that being said, media is purchased based on circulation. So just know those two things. Radio audience. A radio audience is based on program or station ratings, usually station ratings by day parts. That a rating is simply the percentage of a market or the percentage of an audience that's listening, or a potential audience. So if you have a rating of 1, that means 1% of the potential audience is listening. Television, very similar. Ratings, again, are important, and they're measured by the famous ratings measurement service AC Nielsen, whereas radio is usually monitored by a firm called Arbitron. And they publish their ratings information and sell it to ad agencies and other interested parties. The television audience is based on exposing messages to people and making impressions. An impression is one person's opportunity to be exposed one time to an ad or a television commercial. This kind of crosses over between print and radio. So exposure is a single person's exposure to a message. Now, obviously, when you're advertising, you want millions and millions, generally, of exposures. Gross impressions become very large and difficult to work with. Why is that? Well, because most products aren't designed for everybody. So we target our advertising to specific audience or specific programming, and try to reach the maximum percentage of viewers who meet our market criteria or our target audience criteria. One of the things Nielsen does is they have a variety of ways of measuring their audience. They have people meters, diaries, and tools like that to count the viewers of various programmings. And they do these things in periods called sweeps generally. Same with radio. There are certain rating periods during the time of year when everything's measured and monitored. And you will find media kind of being a little tricky sometimes with these, in that they want to have better programming, or they'll put more specials on in order to boost their advertiser numbers. Outdoor viewership. How do we measure outdoor? Well, that's really kind of basic, but it makes a lot of common sense. Outdoor is sold by the percentage of a market that sees an outdoor advertising message, a billboard. So say you have a billboard for, some kind of soap product, and it's seen by 80% of the metropolitan market. Just say, let's use Poughkeepsie, in a given day. So it's probably on Route 9 or a couple places on Route 9, and 80% of the whole Poughkeepsie market sees it at least once a day. Well, then it would be said to be having an 80 showing. Now that's an awful lot, actually, but it's the way that you measure outdoor. Percentage of a market that sees a billboard in a given day. And usually the contracts are over a month, so that 80 showing would repeat and repeat and repeat throughout the month. Online audiences. Media planners are most interested in estimates, and this varies because, as you know, there are so many online resources from social to pay-per-click and banner advertising. There are a lot of ways to advertise online. Key things of interest to media researchers and media planners are the number of visits to websites, how much time was spent there, are there new and repeat visitors, or the percentage, the breakdown between those. Media planning is simply pulling everything together and formulating the plan. And we've talked about many types of planning in this class, but the plan for what you are going to do for a specific campaign. So the goal is to find the most efficient, effective ways to deliver messages to your target. Who is the target? We define that in terms of men and women 18 to 34, or men 18 to 64, things like that. What are the objectives? Well, that comes down to basically what we're selling. What do we want to do? We may have characteristics of our advertising where the creative needs special attention, or we might have event opportunities. Could go many different directions with that. Where? That's the media vehicles used. Television, outdoor. It's going to vary by client and by task, really. Where, again, this time meaning the geography. If you have a local market initiative, or you're targeting a specific region, then geography is pretty important. If you sell a general product across the United States, then you might pick national magazines or network television. So that's the where. When? There's always a time frame. Campaigns aren't endless. They have a beginning and an end. Now, sometimes certain products keep rolling with advertising so continuously we don't think it ever ends, but that's not the case. How big? Media weight. How much money are you spending? Very key consideration. And how efficiently are you spending it? The goal with media planning is always to be the most efficient you can be with the client's dollars. So the target audience is always the key decision, and a lot of that goes back to targeting and segmenting that we talked about earlier in the course. The idea is to select vehicles that are compatible with creative executions and whose audiences best match those of the brand's target audience. tighter the focus on target market, the easier it is to find appropriate media. Now, back to that point about creative executions. That matters sometimes. I mean, consider here an ad in Reader's Digest, which you guys may know is a very tiny magazine. At least it's got small vertical and horizontal measurements. So in that case, you can't really have a long, huge, detailed ad because the maximum size, the full page, is the size of a fractional page in a lot of publications. So here, V8 is an example, and this is shown in the book too. The creative has to be simple and something that reads well in a very small format. Step 2, communications and media objectives. The key here is to deal with two different things, reach and frequency. Reach is the percentage of different people exposed to the message. And then we break it down further by things like targeted reach. Frequency. What's frequency? Well, that's what you might imagine. It's the number of times people see a message or hear a message or are otherwise exposed to the message. They receive impressions, going back a few minutes ago. Effective frequency. With effective frequency, you add frequency until you get to a level where people respond. Now that gets very complicated and it varies so much by client and circumstance that we're really not going to delve into that here. Media professionals spend their careers trying to maximize or optimize these considerations, but I just thought it'd be good to introduce the concept. So reach and frequency are key considerations in advertising. Media strategies. These involve tools that help you identify the best way to deliver the brand message. Also remember, we've talked about this before, media mix. We have a kind of an IMC mix when we talk about different activities, but in terms of advertising media, we do the same thing. Is it best to just use print? Is it best to use print and social? Is it best to use TV with an online component, which is a very common way of advertising and introducing products? These are all considerations for media mix. And we mentioned geographical strategies. I'm not going to go in detail on this slide. It's covered well in the book. But a DMA, we talked about this earlier, is a designated market area. And there are about 200 of them in the United States. We talked about this fairly early in the course. So we're part of in Poughkeepsie, we're part of the New York DMA. Even though Poughkeepsie has its own metro area. So that's spelled out a little more in detail in the book. Another thing that's good for you guys to look at in the book is the pages between 456 and 459. That's it's a kind of a boring looking table layout, but it really does give you a look at differences and advantages and disadvantages in usage of the different media. It's called the Guide to Media Evaluation and Selection. That's not only good for our study of this chapter, but it might be valuable to you as you consider your final project. So take a look at those pages. Scheduling strategies. There's a term to remember here called aperture. Aperture is something that's important to a number of products, and that basically refers to when consumers are most receptive to brand messages. Obviously, there are certain things where seasonality provides the aperture, right? In other words, if you're selling snow blowers or snowmobiles, your aperture is going to be a time period in the late fall or early winter. You have no aperture for selling snow blowers or snowmobiles in April or May. But aperture can relate to advertising a couple days before each weekend. So that's what the term aperture means. Think of it, it's like the aperture of a camera. when you can take it in or when you can expose. Timing strategies. How long do we want to advertise for? How often? Uh, there's a strategy called the pulsing strategy. In other words, you advertise consistently, but you pulse, which is heavy up, intensive peaks before an aperture, and then reduce when the aperture has closed or is closing. A flighting strategy is a little bit different. That's that's the idea of advertising intensely and then dropping your advertising for periods of times. Again, both of these are discussed in a little more detail in the book. Metrics. Media is always driven by metrics. Metrics meaning measurements and how we judge the effectiveness, let's say. So you have to be numbers oriented and you have to be prepared to be accountable for what you deliver. So there's a lot of, we talk about the art and science of advertising. There's a fair amount of science and let's just say accounting that goes with media too. Key measurements, is particularly in broadcast advertising, are rating points. And we break those down by gross rating points and target rating points. Gross rating points, say in television advertising, would be the percentage, would be points based on the percentage of, like, the New York market exposed to an ad on WABC TV during the evening news. That would basically give you a figure of everybody watching the evening news on WABC. Target rating points are different. They're always going to be lower than gross rating points because your target rating points accounts for who your target audience is. So if your product's only designed for men, then your target rating points are going to be about half of what your gross rating points are. But they're going to be even finer than that because maybe you're targeting men under 30 or something like that. So those are the difference between gross rating points or target rating points. Sometimes people in the media business refer to them as grips and trips, believe it or not. CPM, key thing to know, cost per thousand. Targeted CPM, targeted cost per thousand. Cost per point is basically cost per rating point. Media plans don't have a universal form. They do things basically like define the objectives, put down a strategy for achieving the objectives, introducing options, discussing them, and then you get into a presentation of schedule, possibilities, and numbers. And I've seen all different ways these are presented to clients. Buying media is a complicated process. The American Association of Advertising Agencies has various suggestions, including their 21 elements. And basically, a media buyer will do a number of activities that build and fortify the whole buying operation. They provide inside information to the planners. They select media vehicles in conjunction with the planners. The buyers are usually the primary negotiators. And they do a number of other things, as you will see here. One more thing to consider about media is the whole notion of vertical and horizontal publications. A vertical publication is a publication, like, let's take a business-to-business publication, like American Farmer. It's a vertical in that it reaches only the farming industry, and people that are in banking or casino development don't read it. A horizontal publication would be a publication like Business Financial Management Magazine, and that would reach financial management people with discussions of financial concerns in all industries about, latest software, accounting, techniques and how to do better budget forecasting, those sorts of things. So anyway, that's it for this. More detail in the book. Pay attention to those pages I mentioned earlier, and you can always pause on slides. Thank you.